What's good, NWAs? It's Radio Free Intimate episode 251. More than a quarter of a way to 1,000 episodes of this jank.
아니 원스 여러분들이
Don't make promises you can't keep. That wasn't a promise, that was a statement, an observation of sorts. But speaking of how many episodes there have been, thank you so much for watching them, commenting, liking, and subscribing, whatever YouTube stuff I'm supposed to say. And speaking furthermore of that, you, the people, a while back, I believe, on the Merging Moon episode and on the Versailles episode, it's happened a few times. Somebody, can't remember their name, told me to check out Imperial Circus Decadence, and I want to thank them for doing that because they're an awesome band, and I've been listening to them like a whole lot. But haven't really figured out how to cover them until just now. Because if you know this band, you know that they're really weird, and if you don't know this band, guess what? They're really weird. Kind of hard to describe. I believe I have come up with a solution. So most of you are black metal people, right? Here's a black metal comparison. Imperial Circus Decadence are an alternate universe Japanese parallel to Bal-Sagoth.
I know what you're thinking.
No other band sounds like Bal-Sagoth, and honestly, you would be correct.
But
You'll notice that I didn't say they sounded like Bal-Sagoth. I said that they were sort of a weird parallel band to them. Because a lot of the weird idiosyncrasies going on with Bal-Sagoth that make them so unique are very similar to the weird idiosyncrasies going on with Imperial Circus Decadence. They both nominally deal in some weird variety of symphonic black metal. However, it's not the type stuff you think of when you hear the term symphonic black metal. In fact, both these bands are so weird that honestly the only reason that they get called symphonic black metal is because nothing else even remotely fits what they do. Parallels in vocal approach. Bal-Sagoth, they do the spooky black metal vocals. But they also have a whole lot of clean vocals in the form of Byron Roberts' unmistakable narrations. Imperial Circus Decadence also have a dichotomous vocal approach between harsh vocals and clean vocals. The harsh side includes black metal screamy shit, but the harsh vocal portfolio is also widened to include death metal vocals and all sorts of odd inhale screams and burps and strange noises that you usually only hear in a Deviloof album. You know, that kind of shit. On the clean vocal side, Yuki, the primary vocalist, lyricist, and songwriter, does incorporate a whole lot of that Bal-Sagoth style narration, but he also widens the portfolio to include, we'll get into what else is going on with the clean vocal side in a bit, because it's pretty strange. But speaking of further parallels, those two vocalists, Byron Roberts from Bal-Sagoth and Yuki from Imperial Circus Decadence, there's another big parallel between the two bands in that both of these characters are moonlighting, taking part in other artistic endeavors outside of the band. In the case of Byron Roberts, he is a published fantasy author, and in the case of Yuki, he is also an author of sorts, an author and illustrator actually. He's a mangaka, specializing in material of the
What are we going to do on the bed, Oni-chan?
Wow.
variety. I guess we'll just call them risque comics.
I'm hungry.
Lyrical topics and overall band concept. Both of these bands are big on some very dark and esoteric shit, but then displaying that through the lens of a more modernist, goofy cultural lens. In the case of Bal-Sagoth, they're all about the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, as well as the philosophical sword and sorcery of Robert E. Howard, but the way they go about portraying that is very like Jack Kirby, weird pulp comic type stuff. In the case of Imperial Circus Decadence, they're all about ancient Japanese, like prehistory, mythological stuff and weird spooky ghost, yokai, cultural shit. But the lens they examine it through is through that of the Toho Project. And yes, that is how you pronounce it. I know it's spelled Touhou in English. That's just a weird quirk of romanization of Japanese words. The OU is actually signifying a long O sound. So O instead of a short O sound like... If you're unaware of the Toho Project, it's a series of video games, all programmed by one guy, I believe. But not just any type of video games, these are shoot-em-ups, bullet hells. Haven't actually played them myself yet, probably will eventually because I'm all about that kind of shit. I love me some Ikaruga, love me some Gradius, especially Raiden. That's my jam right there, son. Toho Project, that same kind of thing, but it's all about goofy ancient Japanese prehistory yokai shit within the context of cutesy anime magical girl stuff. And for whatever reason, this shit really caught on with the metal community in Japan. There's a whole sort of like weird genre of Toho metal where they kind of do metal covers of songs from the Toho soundtrack. These are known as arrangements. Imperial Circus Dead Decadence comes out of that community, but kind of pulls all of that back to its roots, so they're a little bit more focused on the spooky and less on the cutesy. Their music also has a very frenetic, complex feel to it that I'm pretty sure is supposed to emulate playing a really fast-paced shooter game. Another parallel, despite the fact that both bands might seem very goofy on the surface, they both take their source material 100% seriously, which I think makes it a lot more fun. I mean, Bal-Sagoth, some of the longest song titles in the business, like
The Splendor of 1,000 Swords Gleaming Beneath the Blazon of the Hyperborean Empire.
Similarly, the wackos over in Imperial Circus Dead Decadence got song titles like
The Jet Black Rain That Falls on the Darkness of Crimson.
But even then, that's not the original song title, because obviously it's in Japanese, but it's not even in like regular Japanese. They write in like old Japanese, which meant that getting translations for their song titles was a bitch, and a lot of times it's not even in old Japanese. A lot of it's in a language they made up called Tai-Hai Sekai that's based on old Japanese, sort of like a Tolkien thing, just like inventing a language. Point is, they're weird, delightfully so. They're weird and strange and goofy without being tongue-in-cheek, which is my favorite variety of weird, strange, and goofy. It's entirely authentic. The final major parallel between these two groups is their career trajectory, in that most of their albums, there isn't really a whole lot of musical change from album to album, except on their debuts. In the case of Bal-Sagoth, they started out much more doom-deathy, and then every album after that first one is them very subtly tweaking this formula of black metal, power metal, and spooky narration, symphonic shit. In the case of Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, most of their albums are essentially them refining a formula that was established on their second EP very subtly. But their first album is way more gothic metal sounding than any of their other stuff. So yeah, that first album, The Final Story of Love Died in the Blood of Tragedy and the Black Death of Despair, is very gothic in its affectations, owing a whole lot to Moi de Moi and even Malice Miser at certain points. Here's a wacky little bit of something that sounds an awful lot like folk metal, but with Bal-Sagoth style narration going on over it. That's Yuki doing the narration, by the way. He also does all the male vocals on the album. Female vocals provided by Kylie, speaking of which, one of the major defining aspects of every period of Imperial Circus Dead Decadence's existence is the interplay between multiple vocalists that kind of bounce off of each other with different styles. On this album, the arrangements of said vocal parts aren't as complex as they would become later on. It's mostly just them trading verses back and forth over the guitars and keyboards, all provided by Yuki and another guy named Hull, all wrapped up with a very dark, romantic, gothic bow. They even trade off male and female narration parts. Alright, stuff's starting to get a little bit faster and heavier now. And this trade-off part right here kind of shows off where the band is going to be heading in the future, with a whole lot more black metal. In fact, as this part climbs out of the gothic morass, it kind of turns into something that sounds like a mix between early Psy and like a lot of the old Greek black metal stuff. After that first album, however, they shifted sounds towards the modern stylistic melange that they have been continuing to tweak on every album released since, dropping a whole lot of the gothic trappings in favor of something much more extreme, and what a style it is. They bring in a whole lot of melodic death metal and power metal influences. It makes everything a whole lot more intense. And speaking of a marked increase in intensity, Yuki has gone completely nuts with his vocals this time around. This is the modern style of vocals for him, and he's going to keep using it. There's a very nasty, fast-paced melodic black metal riff, tons of blast beats, and elongated, torturous screams being ripped out of his throat. Even the clean vocals are a lot more intense this time around. Both Yuki and Kylie have become much better singers on a technical level, but the vocal arrangements themselves are much more complex this time around too, jumping between the harsh and clean vocals, doing all sorts of weird layering. And there still is some gothic stuff where it turns into a Malice Miser song for a while, which of course I love.
Wow.
I might also just be gay.
But overall, they've pretty much just metamorphosed into an extremely strange symphonic black metal band. For my money, the best release of this trio era of Imperial Circus Dead Decadence would have to be their second full-length album, entitled,
苦しく咲いた凄惨なムクロは奏で、愛おしく咲いた少女は凄惨の言葉を歌う。
Yeah, that. Whatever. It's the album with the gray cover, and it's got some of their most complex vocal arrangements. Quality fucking melodic death metal guitar riff.
And he's going to flip it around in a very interesting way once we get into the more vocal-heavy section of the song.
As we get into some dank vocal trade-offs right here. Going back and forth between the clean female vocals and the male growled vocals, but they're also like overlapping each other in a very complex way compared to how this style of music is usually done. Also, very high-quality transition riff coming up here. I rate it 5 Metroidvanias out of 5. And speaking of 5 out of 5, check out how Yuki's vocals take off in this section.
Wow.
I don't even know how he remembers all of that, let alone spitting it out with perfect diction. And then we tie it all together. Both vocalists going at the same time, bouncing melodic lines off of each other, and it's incredibly well done. This song in particular was the one that really made me sit up and pay attention to this band. You imagine if Septic Flesh or Therion could pull off something like this nowadays, and it still manages to be extreme metal. This album was definitely an effective capstone for the first era of Imperial Circus Dead Decadence. I say first era because they had a pretty major lineup shakeup after this album came out. You still have the same creative core of Hull and Yuki, but Kylie left, which is a damn shame because I really like her vocals a lot. However, they got something to fix that with because they end up actually turning it into a full proper band with dedicated drummers and bassists and extra guitarists. They fill the female vocalist gap for a bit with guest vocals from Kimmy from Bride Ear on the next big EP to come out, and on that one it really sounds like somebody lit a fire under their ass because it's by far their most intense material, but we don't really need to talk about it because they ended up redoing every song on that EP in an even better form on their most recent full length, where they also managed to secure the services of a full-time female vocalist in the form of Akira Natsuki. But we'll get to that eventually. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. Major breaking news update about Sari from Necronomidol. She's the one with the green hair. I feel like on the Necronomidol episode I talked a whole lot about Himari because she's kind of the more black metal adjacent one. But Sari's super cool too, and I found out a lot of interesting new stuff about her. So here you go. According to interviews, she likes spiders.
Wow.
Okay, that was probably pretty obvious just by looking at her. But another really interesting thing that I learned, she actually auditioned for Necronomidol specifically because the listing mentioned, quote, abandoned buildings and ghosts.
Abandoned buildings and ghosts, that's most definitely what's up, tubes.
And during her time in Necronomidol, not only did she sing and dance, she was also one of the main songwriters and primary lyricists for the group. She ended up retiring from Necronomidol in early 2019 after a very emotional farewell concert where Ray might have cried a little bit and I might have had a similar reaction had I known about Necronomidol at the time. Nowadays, she's got her own wacky solo project that kind of sounds like Bjork driving a Penske truck full of fertilizer into a Venetian Snares album. So obviously that's some really good stuff. And that's your news update. Thanks for paying attention. I would be highly remiss not to mention one of the major side project type entities connected to Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, that being Vermilion D. Alice Syndrome, which is basically Yuki doing vocals for original material from one of the major figures within the whole Toho metal arrangement scene, that being a nice lady named Setsuna. So anyways, Vermilion D. Alice Syndrome. Yeah, it sounds a whole lot like Imperial Circus Dead Decadence. The main difference being that Setsuna's influences as a musician are a little bit more oriented towards melodic death metal and thrash, and not so much in the symphonic black metal realm. But it basically sounds like Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, basically. It's more like a variant band with way less power metal influence than a separate entity. But it is very good, and if you enjoy Imperial Circus Dead Decadence, you will probably dig the shit out of Vermilion D. Alex Syndrome. And I gotta think some of the heaviness from this project might have bled back into Imperial Circus Dead Decadence proper. Because now we are getting to my favorite album from them. That being 2022's,
上がりしへふける思いは陸恥ずかしみすら暗い彼方の生を愛するために命をたたえる
Yeah, that. Look, I'm not big on the whole best albums 2022 crap, but if you were to put a gun to my head and force me to turn this program into some bizarre rack otaku version of Loudwire, this is the album of the year for me so far, and I don't see it getting dethroned anytime soon. Holy shit, it's Danny Filth.
Incredible, smooth muscle control.
Just kidding, it's just Yuki. But man, this album is way heavier than anything they've done before. A lot of it has to do with the new drummer, a man by the name of Shuhei Kamada, better known by his black metal name, 1000 Armed Avalokite Shiwara. And listening to this guy drum, yeah, I can believe it. But where this album really blows me away is with the vocal performance.
That's a lovely, lovely voice.
That's the new gal on vocals, Akira. And you're not going to believe how amazing the trade-off vocal section is coming up right now. Got both of these amazing vocalists looping over each other's lines in the most complex ways and making it look easy. And the music absolutely rises up to match that level of vocal performance. Particularly during this section where it sounds like you got some weird black metal reimagining of a lunacy riff with the vocalist going full Hansi Kirsch over the whole thing. Absolutely incredible stuff. Some of the best power metal in the business. But don't worry. There's plenty of hyper-complex technical death metal and weird symphonic black metal stuff to go around to keep it from getting too fruitful. I cannot recommend this album enough. It's amazing. It's probably the best example of blackened power metal, Bal-Sagoth core, whatever the hell it is you call it. They're really freaking good at it, okay? And you should go out and listen to more of it. Speaking of listening, thanks for listening to this episode. Thanks to the folks that recommended this band to me way back when. And I'll see you next time.
It's about time I was allowed to have some fun. Now I'm gonna teach our visitor a lesson.
No, don't do it. He's too powerful.
Ah! You're right. Why didn't you tell me sooner?